Hello, this is Angela from Girl Scouts Heart of Michigan, and I am here today to help you with the Girl Scout Textile Art Badge for Seniors. We're specifically going to look at step 4, which is focused on accessories and wearable items. That is going to be our main focus, but some of the things we're going to talk about will touch on the earlier steps of the badge, and also possibly even step 5, where it says make some textile art and give it to someone else. Maybe something you'll make from this video you won't just keep for yourself, but you'll make something for somebody else. So this video can help you achieve more than just step 4 possibly of the textile art badge. So if you didn't catch that, the type of textile art we are going to work on is embroidery. Embroidery is the type of textile art that is most versatile throughout all the textile art forms. Embroidery is basically stitching with thread. And so stitching is a basis of sewing. And on top of it, not only can you use those stitches to create items through hand sewing, but also you can use those stitches to decorate the things you're sewing. You can also use those stitches to embellish weaving and knitting and crocheting. And so it's a really, really powerful part of the textile art world. Now, we are now going to go through the supplies that you need for this project that we are going to do today. Now, for embroidery, you do definitely need thread, or embroidery floss, which is what it's called in traditional embroidery or cross stitch. It typically comes this way. It's usually in a bunch of shelves in the craft store in the needle art aisle, and they're typically maybe $1 and some change. Or you can buy a big pack with a whole bunch together and use a coupon on it. I mean, the craft stores tend to have coupons. Don't not use them. So, embroidery floss. Embroidery floss is actually made up of 6 different threads. If I can get them apart here so I can show you. Yeah, so here, see all those little threads? There's 6 of them in here. So, one of the things in embroidery that embroidery floss allows is for thinner stitches and thicker stitches. And so typically when you're learning to cross stitch or embroider, you will see that a pattern particularly will say, I only want you to use 3 threads or 2 threads, only 1 thread. So then you pull that embroidery floss apart to go down to 1 thread or 2 threads or 3 threads. Or sometimes you just use the whole 6 thread twisted together piece of embroidery floss. Now, speaking of the thread, you could actually use real thread, but real traditional sewing thread is really thin. It is 1 strand of this basically. And even then, oftentimes it's thinner than this. So you're gonna wanna take a bunch of strands and twist them together to do a lot of what we are doing today. It'll make it so much easier to do it. So I really recommend embroidery floss. The other option is yarn. There is something called Crewel Embroidery, and that is embroidering with yarn. Historically, it was usually wool that you were embroidering with, but today there's way more options in yarn with synthetics and other things like natural things like bamboo. So Crewel Embroidery is definitely an option. I'm going to use yarn today. I'm going to use embroidery floss. Now, if you're going to do embroidery, you also have something to embroider. So the next thing I want to show you is embroidery cloth or cross stitch fabric. I highly recommend this when you're learning the basics because there is a woven pattern in the Aida cloth, which is actually what it's called, and you can actually see holes in it. And it allows it to make it easier for the cross stitch to occur, but also it'll help you with spacing for some of the other stitches as you're learning. It's not very expensive, and if you look at mine, you might notice there's a purple sticker on it. This is a good moment to plug that used stores often have needle art supplies. I think it's one of those things where time consuming. It's a time consuming craft at times. It's time consuming art form, textile art, especially embroidery and knitting and crocheting and things like that. And when someone passes away or can no longer do it, they often have a whole lot of supplies and unfinished projects, and so they end up getting donated. So I highly recommend checking out your local used stores to see what you can find, because almost everything I am using today came from a used store. In fact, not only did my embroidery cross stitch fabric, my Aida cloth, come from there, but so did my embroidery hoops. Embroidery hoops are what we're going to put the fabric in to hold it taut and tight and make it strong and easy to embroider on, so you don't get any wrinkles or sagging or pinches where you've gone through the wrong part of the fabric. So embroidery hoops, I highly recommend them These are plastic, but there's also wood ones that are even cheaper. Although I bought these used, so these were pretty cheap in the first place. As well, actually, speaking of used, like this whole bag of embroidery floss came from a used store. And in fact, my yarn did as well. These came from Goodwill. So you just don't know what you're gonna find, but I do highly recommend looking in used stores. Now, the one thing that you probably won't find in a used store is what you're gonna use as needles. That's something I've not had real success finding used. And that is probably because they're so tiny and they get used a lot. And this is what we're looking for. See the larger needle? This is an embroidery needle. The needle right next to it is for sewing. And for embroidery, you want this bigger, more substantial eye hole here than what you have in this little tiny sewing needle, because you're using a much smaller thread in this one, and this is 6+ of those threads that you sew with. So you do need a bigger needle. Embroidery needles typically come in a set. They will say embroidery on them. Sometimes there's more than one size of embroidery needle, depending on the size of your embroidery floss. Also, there is literally embroidery needles for Crewel Embroidery that have even bigger holes. Sometimes they're tapestry needles or weaving needles, even they would work. Sometimes they're thicker though and not quite as pointy, especially weaving needles. So they will have a much bigger eye hole to get the yarn through, because obviously this is even thicker typically. So needles, you're gonna need embroidery needles. Now, the next thing you're going to need is something you want clothing wise to embroider on. And the last thing is something that's slightly weird. So you might have noticed that I'm not wearing the necklace I was wearing. And that's because we are going to make a necklace pendant. And what the necklace pendant comes from is this guy. It's a K-cup for a coffee maker. And if you squeeze the bottom of this K-cup, you can feel there's something hard in it. And it's a filter to help brew the coffee. And it looks like this. Let me see if I can pull one out here. Looks like this. See all those holes? It's pretty cool, huh? Reduce, reuse, recycle. My favorite way to make things. So, in my house, we use K-cups a lot. There's only 2 people, and one of them hates coffee, so this is, in a way, a lot more practical. So I always take my K-cups apart, and I recycle the plastic, and I actually collect all the coffee out of it, and I use it to acidify my hydrangeas and make them very happy. So when I did that, I discovered this plastic filter. And the first thing I thought of was, I can embroider that or cross stitch that. I must do that. Now, I realize not all of you might have a K-cup at home that has one of these filters in it. But typically Starbucks K-cups and Pete's Coffee K-cups, and there might be others out there, but these are the ones I know for sure typically have this plastic filter in them. As well, there are other options. So if you do not have access to K-cups, no one around you uses K-cups, hey, that's probably a good thing. There are options out there besides that to make a pendant necklace. Let's see if I can find in my stuff on the table. So here's an option. This is a wood one with the holes cut into it. And as you can see, this is not a whole lot bigger than this. And basically it's gonna function the same way to decorate it. You're going to stitch in through the holes the same way you stitch through that little filter from inside the K-cup. So craft stores carry these. You can buy them online. They're pretty easy to find these days. There's even smaller ones for earrings. There's also another type. It's like a miniature embroidery hoop. Let's see if I can get in here and you can see it closer. So there's the like embroidery hoop thing, and there's like a wood piece, and you wrap the embroidery fabric around the wood piece, and then you put the little hoop around it. I haven't actually used these yet, I'll be honest. Obviously this is still in the container or in the packaging, but it is another option out there that you can find in the craft stores to make a pendant necklace. So your options are not limited to just your recyclables, although I highly recommend, even if you don't have this, maybe you look around your house and see what else you could find that could become something that you embroider. Maybe you punch the holes in it yourself, or maybe you just have something that already has holes in it. It's one of those things where you might find something you didn't expect, like I did, to use as a way to embroider, or your basic structure for your embroidery to make a necklace. Now, as far as the necklace goes, if you look there on the top is a jump ring. It's a little metal circle that you can find in the craft aisle, and that is what my chain is going through. The chain is actually a chain I already had, and if you want a chain, they sell lots of different types of chain in the craft store. So I highly recommend taking something you already have and using it as a chain, or picking something up at the craft store. But there are definitely different options. You can use different types of chain. It's really up to you what you want to use. So basically, I forgot a couple things. I'm just so excited to get started that I forgot we need scissors, because we're going to need to cut our cloth and our thread, right? And we need chalk, which, all right, really honestly, you probably want something smaller than the sidewalk chalk, but I cannot find anything else in my house right now, so we're going to work with the white sidewalk chalk and a pencil. And you might even appreciate having a ruler. Oh, and an eraser on your pencil. So yeah, that is the last of our supplies. Okay. Are you guys ready to get started on things? Because I sure am. So the first thing we are going to do is we are going to look at the basic stitches for embroidery. And honestly, you can do this with any embroidery floss colors you want, or any yarn that you want, but I highly recommend making a rainbow, because that's what I'm going to do. So if you look, I made an example and I got really detailed on this. So I created practice stitches, and in here, in each one of these lines, there is a type of embroidery stitch. And I'm going to get much, much closer with this. So there's a running stitch here, there's back stitch here, I think this is stem stitch, and then this one right here, I believe, is chain stitch, and then there is the split stitch, and then the French knot, which I struggle with a little. So then I filled in my rainbows with the satin stitch, and this is done with the split stitch and the satin stitch, and this is done with split stitch. And then around here, there's split stitch and blanket stitch, and actually that's what it's attached with, is the blanket stitch. So we're not going to do all of this. This is up to you. It's a sort of inspiration. I thought it was cute enough to actually embroider it and applique it onto my lunch bag for work. So what we are going to do though is the lines of the rainbow, and then we'll talk about how we fill it in as well. Now, obviously, you can use any colors to make your rainbow, but this also means that you need your embroidery fabric, your Aida cloth, or your plain fabric that you are using to practice on, because any fabric will actually work. You don't necessarily need to have cross-stitch embroidery fabric. Any will work. Now, you're going to need that. You're going to need your scissors, you're going to need your needles, you're going to need your embroidery floss, and your pencil for this. So I've got my fabric, and I have all of those things laid out around me, and we're going to get started. To practice our stitches by making our rainbow, but I'm going to now show you the first stitch, which is the running stitch.